Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episodes and we're going to discuss about the sustainable cities, and we have our expert panelist, Mr. Ben. He is president of Swiss Impact Investment. We also have Mr. Rob. We have Dr. William. We have Professor Donalds. So hopefully it will be very informative discussion. Besides that, World Talent Economy Forums, we are working on developing smart city projects in South Asia as well as in Malaysia. We are trying to develop, but hopefully by different kind of good policy and strategic discussions, we can take some good initiative for our smart cities projects. So I want to start with Mr. Ben, because he has a huge experience on impact investment, and he have a lot of involvement in intellectual community and different corporate consultings and many more things, and he is very active in India and Europe. So I want to start with Mr. Ben. So hello, Mr. Ben, how are you today?
Thank you very much. I'm not very active in India, although I am originally from India. I'm mainly active in the Europe and Nordics.
Okay. Okay, just few days ago, World Talent Economy Forums, we get invitation from Indian Prime Ministers, Mr. Modi. He actually give award to Mr. Ratan Tata in ASSOCHAM associations. So India also taking a lot of initiative for sustainable cities and many more things. And Asia Pacific, I think perhaps they are developing more than 42 smart city projects right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, we love to learn more about the European strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I can just talk about, so I have been, from our organization, we have been involved with 6 smart cities. One in Georgia. A long time ago, we started also in DRC, that's the Democratic Republic of Congo. Turkmenistan, that's a part of ex-Soviet Union, Soviet countries. Of course, Netherlands has been developing a little bit. In Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is developing a kind of smart city in its borderline with the mainland China. And last and not the least, Algeria. There also, we got involved with smart cities. And I just made a short term what we noticed from our experience, because we have been busy with it more than around 6-7 years. We do the whole spectrum of it. So that means from planning, resourcing, till the funding of it. Not the running of it, because that's of course local task. But we do have the technological and the financial resources. So what I would say, what I noted down in my piece of paper on this topic, is that the 4 most important things that we found out, which is of crucial importance for smart cities. One is, the first and the foremost is long-term planning. Smart city is not something you do within a month or a year. It's 20, 30 years planning. So it needs a very long breath. You have to hold your breath for, and it has different. Second most important part is the authorities. If you do not have full support and long-term complete support of the authorities, national and local, it's not going to happen. Third is cooperation among all the stakeholders. Smart cities needs extreme lot of stakeholders from every corner of it, and they have to work together from the day one. They have to plan from the planning phase to the implementation phase. And last and most, one of the most important point of the 4 is resources. Smart cities are very resource intensive. So you need technical resource, technical experts, financial resource, financial experts, legal resource, legal experts. And one of the best ways to do it, what we learned, is to use people who have already done it in the past, or at least have a very, very strong management and control. Otherwise, things tend to develop in their own way, own part, because otherwise you have the kind of organic growth, and that's not something you want. Because a lot of old cities, if you look, I can give a very good example. One of the city developments I got involved with, this is nearly 20 years ago, is in Romania. So Romania has the city Timișoara. So if people are aware of a little bit of European city development, so if you have Romania and Hungary, many cities grew organically. So that means one house and then second house, and there was no central planning system, no city planning system. Same happened in a lot of East European countries. And then Romania, I was then in the parliament, and I was in the city management of one of the cities called Utrecht. And we were approached by the Romanians to support us with this. And Netherlands, at that time, Romania was not a part of EU. It's a long time back. So Netherlands supported them with the development of a city called Timișoara. It's in the northern part of Romania. And if you see it today, it is far more developed, far more planned than other cities of Romania, which had the organic development. So in these phases, I would say that it really helps if the planning is really from the day one involving all the stakeholders. I think with this, I ran out of all my points.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Rob, how do you want to add this smart city concept? We will come up with some information from the real world, but we want to know more about your viewpoints.
Sure. We've actually been involved with a number of the smart city developments, and the key is, as Ben pointed out, to have a thorough plan up front and make sure that your partner that you tied up with has done this before. Most of the problems that exist in smart city developments come from the fact that nobody seems to know what they're doing. They're all learning on the job. That's kind of problematic. Another big problem is you have too many chefs, not enough cooks. If you engage with too many large companies, each one has their own individual agenda, and they often don't interoperate or work well together. So having a strong major contractor that's keeping everything together helps an awful lot. And recognize that as you're doing a smart city project, you do have to concern yourself with things like liability. What happens if something goes wrong? Some of the more interesting smart city developments kind of fell apart when the city decided they didn't want to take responsibility for any failures. And that kind of throws a monkey wrench into things like smart stoplights or getting the city infrastructure to talk with the emerging group of autonomous cars. Because if the car receives bad information, for instance, and causes an accident, and that information came from the city, that obviously the city is going to be liable, but the city doesn't want to accept that liability. So then they don't enable the part that communicates with the cars, and you get something that's a lot less safe. So working through all those elements early on, strong general contractor, experienced general contractor, a good idea of what you want to do, and recognizing there is going to be liability involved, and just making sure that you don't make the mistakes and you've got plenty of redundancy and security. By the way, that's one of the last things that folks tend to consider for whatever reason, is the fact that stuff needs to be secure. And if you implement a lot of automation and yet you are not secure, you're going to have serious problems as we go through the following years. So preparation, execution, and making sure everybody's on board. Ben made one really important point, which is making sure that the administration is on board with all of this. If you've got a government that really isn't sure if they want the smart city effort or not, it's going to fail. And so you might want to hold off until you've got support from the mayor and the city council and the other leading politicians to get it done. Otherwise, it's just going to go sideways and it's not going to end right.
Thank you. I just want to add one specific point, because World Talent Economy Forum, we are very much action oriented, not only discussions. We take a lot of action. Last month, one of our startup from Malaysia, Cyberjaya, Hello Robotics, we introduced these autonomous vehicle systems to Silicon Valley with one of our partners, and they are developing the food delivery systems in Silicon Valleys. So hopefully by this way, like even it's a first Malaysian technology we are trying to introduce, we already introduced with our partners. So hopefully, like those who are observing, I know that many universities, many young and many policymakers, many startups, they will observe our show. So I request those who are interested to present your startup and technology with World Talent Economy Forums, you can join. And I'm sure that we have a very strong ecosystem, like Mr. Ben, Mr. Rob, Mr. Alex, Dr. Williams, and Professor Donalds. All of them are very highly connected and intellectually they're sharps, and they also can help you as mentors. So Dr. William, you are a great policymaker and policy consultant. So how do you want to introduce to the sessions? And unmute yourself.
Sorry. What I can say is I don't know if I'm so great, so please. I do know that I just want to say, at least from the United States, from my corner of the small blue marble that we have out there in the universe, Merry Christmas.
Same here.
So we're wearing red, and is on his way around the world in whatever form or creation or contemplation. But if not, just looking out for one another today should be in our hearts. I think what I'd like to do is begin with this notion, at least to try to define smart cities so that our audience kind of understands it. And that is essentially at its core, basic core, it's the idea of using technology to make the cities more efficient or transparent. And so that covers the gambit from social services, which involve any kind of, whether at least, and I'm only talking in terms of my frame of reference, but I'm sure it's in other nations as well. Things like the Department of Motor Vehicle or access to social services, or in other areas, as has been mentioned by both Ben and Rob, transportation. Something as visible as synchronization of traffic lights to improve the flow of traffic, which has additional benefits in climate change because it reduces the idling time. So there are a whole bunch of things as you drill down. But then it's also any transparency, either with government or things. It's also being used in certain cities. For example, the city that is close to my heart, Buffalo, New York, when they use data centers to target crime so that they can be smart about targeting problem areas with regard to response times, crime areas, which areas need more resources. So, and it's also been used to a lesser degree with regard to planning for infrastructure rehabilitation, such as pothole repair, repairing the streets. And quite frankly, in this time of wintry weather, it was also implemented, just as a practical matter in some cities, to get greater usage and coverage for road salt and road sand to cover the roads, making them safer. And they did this quite simply by adding dyes. So they would add blue dyes or whatever color the municipality preferred. So that way they could actually visually tell. That combined with putting GPS trackers on the trucks so they could ensure specific routes and map the routes faster. Now, we've seen this in private sector as well, because quite frankly, UPS and FedEx have been at the forefront of doing this with regard to the deployment of their fleets in terms of both routing their packages, putting packages on the right trucks, and making sure the trucks go on a determined pattern, which is the most efficient way to deliver the packages. And sometimes it seems really odd, but they pioneer those algorithms. So in that regard, the good news is that some of these things have already been pioneered by the private sector. But the statements by both Ben and Rob are absolutely correct. You do need buy-in. I'm not necessarily so sure that you need 100% complete buy-in across the board, because that would just be an insurmountable odds to begin with. And I know that different cities have different needs, and different municipalities have different needs in terms of what their priorities are, because they have finite resources with regard to their money. So they have to look at those areas that are going to return the biggest bang for the buck. But with regard to smart cities, certainly planning is important. But I guess in our situation in the U.S. really is not that different than developing worlds, because we are faced with this concrete problem or challenge, and that is, how do we go about retrofitting cities and areas of the country that have already been laid out? And Ben, I find it interesting that you talk about Eastern European cities, because quite frankly, New York City, when you get below, I think it's about 34th Street on both sides, there was no planning, and that's why they call it a village, because the streets are all messed up. And, you find it in a number of eastern cities, particularly Boston as well. Boston is notorious for being hard to drive unless you're from there and have learned the stuff, because the streets are not laid out in any kind of planned purpose. But it's really the question, how do you go about retrofitting those notions? And that's really the it's part policy, it's part pragmatic, and you do need people that kind of already understand the issue and bring something to the table. So you're quite right. And Dr. Sharif, you certainly here at the World Economic Forum, or Economy Forum, have all the tools, because you have access to a wide range of policy people, as well as people with boots on the ground who have the prior experience that could actually step in and start to advise people. But there are any, so at least for my case, great opportunity. There is a conjunction, just not to rip off Saturn or Jupiter, but there is a great conjunction here in the United States, at least, where we have an expansionary approach to government coming in, a great deal of work that needs to be done with regard to infrastructure. But now we have at least on the ground experience and policies that can be utilized to at least approach the problem. I don't know that we can have a 100% panacea solution all at once, but I know that we might have to approach it by way of retrofitting. Now, if you're starting a new country, then I'd hire Ben.
Yes, I think if Mr. Ben actually very busy, but definitely he will join in your team. So we have our innovations expert, Professor Donalds. So yes, how do you want to introduce today's like topics and agenda?
Well, I appreciate what everyone else has said. I want to add a little bit about what smart cities are and can be. One of the things that is useful for smart cities is modern technology, like the Internet of Things. And in theory, imagine that you have a self-driving car. Why would you have, got people out of the equation, why would you have stoplights? It doesn't make sense, because we know where all the cars are, and we can analyze what the exact right speed is for two cars to be able to go through an intersection without hitting each other. That's something that's a little bit down the road, but in the United States, we're starting to implement 5G technology, which allows us to have basically ping it fast enough that we can do things like that. Well, in theory, a smart city would be able to have that kind of infrastructure. In some countries in the world right now, they have they're monitoring pinging cell phones so that they can monitor COVID. So you can, if somebody has encountered somebody else who we know has COVID, we can do the contact tracing by looking at the cell phone. And in fact, I put something on my phone that supposedly does that. But in the United States, many people have a culture of not being cooperative. It's their independence and their wonderfulness. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But one of the parts of smart cities has to be not just buy-in from the governments, but buy-in from the individuals to be able to decide that they want to be able to have their, quote, privacy, unquote, disrupted. I think it's useful to understand how strong the technology is, because that has two different values. One value is that we can start understanding what the potential of smart cities is, and the other is it describes what the opportunities for entrepreneurs and new businesses are. We can't basically predict what we're going to be able to do in smart cities. Right now, people are coming up with things that make it more possible. My expertise from college, from university, and what I've written about is social networks. And in its potential that we could, by pinging people's phones, everybody has a phone practically. And by doing that, we could actually understand what areas of the country, of the city, people are congregating, where the bottlenecks are, just all kinds of things that we could start to understand about how cities work and monitor. And with artificial intelligence technology, we could use that to manage a lot of problems. And I'm taught that, so that's one end of smart cities, just the using technology to be able to organize cities in ways that are most beneficial for the people that live in it. On the other end, a more simple view of smart cities, if you look in Wikipedia, of all things, this little town I live in, which is basically a suburb of Silicon Valley, and its main feature that it has is a nice beach and roller coaster and stuff. So people use it for entertainment, basically. The town has little, it does have Looker, which is a AI company that was bought by Google. So there is some technology here, but mostly it's just a playground for people. And but yet it's in Wikipedia as a smart city. And it is for the exact same reason that Dr. William just mentioned, which is that they're analyzing where crime is and taking the areas where there's the most crime and allocating the police resources for those areas. So it's basically a sensible thing. In what the way I would describe it is that we find places in social networks where there's clusters in those social networks that have higher crime. But if you look at the whole thing, like clusters of people that are COVID positive, people that are higher crime, and you can think of shopping areas, like which shopping area is most successful, which shopping area is least successful. We can look at traffic patterns from cars. There's places now, I've seen companies, pitches from companies that can analyze, look at a street and figure out which car is parking too long. So they don't need parking meters anymore. You can look at the license plate and find out which car is parking too long. And of course, there's no reason, it's actually important for a self-driving car to have some sort of something that you can ping so you know where it is. So you have to know where every self-driving car is. The other end of that is just, can people imagine having their car, in Finland, when you drive down the road, they have cameras. People are kind of terrified of them, and their phones all have these little maps on them, so they know where the cameras are, so they can speed. But then when they know where the cameras are, they all slow down. and that's an example of the kind of technology that is early stage of what we're talking about, what the extreme end of what smart cities can be. On the other hand, back to what I was saying about Dr. William, the technology that's used to identify high crime areas, that Giuliani did that in New York. It's in the tipping point. There's discussion of that. So it can be very low tech to incredibly high tech. And I think that besides the problem of having the buy-in from the governments, we also need buy-in from the people to make it happen.
Thank you. Mr. Alex.
Yes, hello. Good morning, everyone. So Dr. William said a couple interesting things. So we would love to build smart cities, but unless we live in areas like the Middle East and Dubai, where we have, hundreds of thousands of empty acres of space, it's not necessarily possible in a lot of places. So we are doing a lot of retrofitting of the current cities, and so we have less ability to completely build new cities. But there are a lot of cities that are getting caught up with new technologies and incorporating all the data that they're receiving to help organize or allocate their assets, their resources, public services programs to become more efficient when it comes to tracking crime, tracking cars, tracking oil leaks, gas leaks, just to help keep the community safe. I think smart cities of the future would have more electrical plugins for both hybrid and electric vehicles, maybe more charging capabilities and stations, which I haven't seen yet, for a lot of the electric scooters and skateboards and bicycles and stuff that we see like that. Along those lines, I think smart cities of the future would have more bike lanes and bike routes, and make it more bike paths that pass all the traffic in different directions, or possibly avoid cars and aren't necessarily next to the road, to help keep the bikes safe from the vehicles until we transition completely into electric self-driving vehicles. Similar to that, I think there should be more handicap accessibility for people in wheelchairs, people with disabilities. We see throughout California and the United States, that they're implementing it into new laws. So now we're having to go in and retrofit all of these new buildings and bathrooms to be handicap accessible. So if we incorporated that in newer cities, that would be smart because it lowers our carbon emissions and our environmental impact if we just do things right the first time. So that's covering some of those aspects. Dr. William again mentioned how efficient stoplights can be and how it would help reduce the idling time, because idling, those are unnecessary carbon emissions going into the atmosphere, which supplements global warming. So another huge solution to this, which I'm a huge supporter of, is roundabouts. Roundabouts are very efficient. Unfortunately, some people don't know how to use them, but there's roundabouts in a lot of countries I've traveled to around the world. They do have a lot in Scandinavia and throughout Europe. They're just more efficient. So why would you stop at a stop sign if there's no other cars or if there's two cars? So then you keep your forward momentum and your trajectory consistent so you don't have to come to a complete stop. There's different versions of roundabouts, small ones, large ones. They are very efficient. So incorporating those into new cities, I believe California, we implemented something where all new home and business construction projects had to have either solar or living roofs. I will try to double check that, or correct me if I'm wrong. So that's solar roof or living roof. So new cities would also be implemented in the whole concept or planning stages. So there's a lot of options for permeable concrete or sustainable concrete, different sources, so it has lower carbon emissions. Permeable concrete allows the rain to soak through the concrete into the ground, so we don't see as much flooding, especially like we saw after Hurricane Harvey in Houston, Texas, where a lot of people were devastated because of that. If you're there's a lot of opportunity for engineering future cities, retrofitting current cities. So I'd recommend anyone watching this video learn everything you can about LEED certification. I actually took a course in sustainable building construction and design. We learned a lot about LEED certification. That means when you're building a new home or a business, you can get one of a variety of certifications. There's like gold and platinum and silver, different levels. So that would mean, how is it sustainable? How is it like net zero emissions? Did you use LED light bulbs, recycled material, zero VOC paint? What type of insulations did you use? So there's a lot of things that lowers the environmental impact of buildings. You can learn about that with LEED certifications. Some of the largest businesses in the world that are building new businesses.
You are adding very important information for our session, but Mr. Ben, actually, I like, he has a very tight schedule, but he joined today. I want to give him a floor because as a policymaker and strategic, he want to add something, and it will be very helpful. And definitely, I will give you a chance. So, Mr. Ben. Sorry.
Thank you.
Mr. Ben, like example, in the COVID situation, actually a country like India, even many countries, many people from the city, they're already going back to village, millions and million people, not only in India, in many other countries we know. So what will be the next strategy? Even according to UN, we know 6.5 billion people, they may go under this kind of services, smart city, and whatever we discuss about smart village for country like India, country like Pakistan, Bangladesh, or Indonesia. So what will happen next 5 years? Because you are a very good feature analyst, and what your predictions in the COVID situation?
Oh, did you read the last speech that Guterres gave? Guterres from the United Nations, where he said that I don't remember the words exactly. It's something like that. This COVID is just a kind of trial for the things that are supposed to come. This COVID is nothing compared to what is coming behind it, especially with the climate change. So of course, there's no way you are going to avoid it. Smart cities have to be implemented, and it will be implemented. And for this, I add up to what Will said. One point Will did not include was the sustainability, because that's also, I think, an extremely important part for the cities to be. Before I run off, I'm not running off because I have a commitment. I'm running off because it's a Christmas Eve here, and my family is going to lock me out of the house and change the door keys if I don't run soon. So I had 2 points. One is that most of you are coming from places where the cities are new. Unfortunately, I live in a continent where most of the cities are very old. So it is it's not very easy. For example, what Alex said about roundabout, that's absolutely correct. But it's impossible to implement roundabout. I come from Netherlands, which is an extremely densely populated country.
Oh, right.
To
Yes.
implement roundabouts. We are one of the most advanced technologically. Whatever you mentioned in California, you are implementing, we already have it the last 10, 15 years with traffic light, controlling the car number plates, knowing who is parking where, how. These technologies we have already implemented and everything is working there. But implementing like roundabouts is going to be difficult. And the second is like the self-driving car, what Professor Donald said. That's absolutely, I mean, I have myself a Tesla. The first thing my son, who is 13 years old, when he got into the Tesla, first thing he said is, shit, we can't rob a bank anymore. Because the car will brake whenever somebody comes in the front, and it studies the speed limit on the road, and speeds down. You can't run away with that car. So what is very important in Europe in this way is the privacy element. So I think this is going to take a long time. I think that's exactly what Professor Stanley meant. It is the buy-in of the individuals, and that's not going to be easy with an old continent like Europe, where people have had some bad experience in the last centuries, and they will not so easily hand over their privacy or their details. And that can be a huge how do you say it? Pushback.
Barrier. Yeah.
Barrier, yes, and
yeah.
push back if we try to implement. So these are things which I think is a long-term planning, which the policymakers have to consider before implementing these things. And new cities, yes, but with old cities, it's a bit hard. So that's all I can think of, and now I have to run. Thank you so very much, guys. It was amazing.
Thank you.
And,
thank you, Mr. Ben. Thank you, Mr. Ben.
to all of you.
Okay. Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Merry
Bye-bye.
Christmas.
Bye. Bye. Mr. Alex, sorry, I interrupt you. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Mr. Alex.
I apologize if I didn't know. So yeah, I can cover a couple more things. Just how collecting all this data that I mentioned a few moments ago does help a city not only become more efficient, it helps everyone become safe, because there are a lot of, like here in Santa Cruz, we actually do have a crime map that shows where there's crime, and it's uploaded to a website, and we've seen the crime increase over the years. Donald was also mentioning the tracking app when it comes to COVID, if you've been exposed to someone, and I actually have that installed on my phone too. I think it's called CA Notify, and you have your Bluetooth on, so it pings every time you're next to someone, and then if they mark in the app that they have COVID, it'll know all the people that it pinged next to. So that, there's a lot of ways that we can use technology. Smart cities, I would recommend, just from my experience, what I've seen. There's a lot of countries that I've been to that are hurricane prone regions, and they continue to build okay, so like Puerto Rico, they build concrete houses because there's a lot of hurricanes. So they do that because they're smart. So instead of us continuing to build like wood houses in the forest, I mean, just building not necessarily with what we have right there in that area, but we don't want it to continue to get destroyed by disasters, by floods. So if you're in a flood prone region, then we got to design, things accordingly to the disasters of the future. With that in mind, we have to be, take into consideration that the ocean level is rising. We will continue to see more flooding at coastal areas. So when we plan new cities, or if we're retrofitting old cities, we definitely have to take into consideration the coastal cities, or what other disasters are going to increase in severity or frequency in the future. I know that there's always a lot of electrical outages during major disasters, so that would be one thing to take into consideration. What I've noticed throughout Europe is there's a lot of parks, and people are happy. I think if there's more parks, it creates more community. Outside of the pandemic, I think more parks are really good for a city and a community, and it would help with the well-being of everyone. And then another thing that I'd mention is, like, if we're going to build a city or start a new city, make sure that you have the water infrastructure or the water resources to give everyone water and have enough water for that city. And we're seeing that in different places around the world. There's just not enough water for the city, and that's causing a lot of huge issues. And one last thing, just when I was in Finland and other countries throughout Scandinavia, not only do they burn all of their trash and they incinerate it to create electricity and to heat all their homes. There's one really interesting thing that they do where they have these suction machines, and they actually take all the recycling, I think it was Finland, and you drop your trash in and it sucks it all the way up through these underground pipes to a central location. So you don't have trucks driving around causing harmful emissions, causing traffic, potentially putting children and pedestrians at risk. So those suction devices taking trash, that's something that would be incorporated into a smart city, I think, just to make it more efficient. So that's how I'd like to conclude. Thank you.
I want to ask Mr. Rob, before I ask question, there are few things I just want to add. In 2018, 4.2 billion people, 55% of the world population, lived in cities. So we need to be careful about this 4.2 billion people. Cities occupy just 3% of the earth land, but account for 60 to 80% of energy consumption. 828 million people are estimated to live in slums. In 1990s, there were 10 cities with 10 million people or more. By 2014, the number were mega cities rose to 28 and expected to be reached by 33 by 2018. Even the last year data, what I find from the Malaysia and Singapore, that in this region, Asia Pacific, around 40 mega cities actually developing. 90% in the coming decade, 90% of the urban expansion will be developed worlds, and the economic role of the city is significant. They generate about 80% of the global GDP. But my questions to Mr. Rob, actually, you are a futuristic thinker. So what type of technology and innovation we can see that this kind of smart city project, they will integrate it with technology, and the much populations get involved with different kind of technology in the smart city projects or in the smart city planning?
Well, as a lot of people have pointed out, the issue we really have is the fact that we've got existing cities that need to be retrofitted, and that's not easy. We do have new cities being built. Bill Gates' city in Arizona will be a point in fact, and of course, Walt Disney, years ago when he created his concept of the city of the future, was incredibly had incredible foresight. To Alex's point, most of the interchanges were roundabouts. They took a lot of effort into laying out the traffic patterns, the public transportation aspect of it. And for the time, and we're talking 1960s, it was incredibly advanced. Sadly, that city project died when Walt did. But the concept of being able to build something from scratch is really where we probably need to be when we're talking about true cities of the future, because what we haven't been talking about a lot has to do with smart cities, has to do with delivery of power, delivery of water, managing sewage, managing the city's infrastructure, including trash pickup and delivery. And that requires getting underneath the city, which is incredibly expensive for a city that already exists, but far easier for a city that you're building from scratch. I did want to comment on something that Don said with regard to traffic lights. The reason why you still have traffic lights is because we're going to have human drivers up through 2035, and human drivers don't interact well without some form of notification whether they should stop or not. And recognize there's a lot of pushback right now with regard to autonomous cars, suggesting unless that pushback is addressed, that the rollout of autonomous cars will probably lag on to about 2040. The industry is aware of it, and now we're starting the PR effort to try to get people on board with autonomous cars. One interesting note, by the way, with autonomous cars, in the testing that Intel did, they found that people actually were more comfortable if the cars did not have a steering wheel than if it did have a steering wheel, because they were concerned about having to take control of the car in an emergency. And of course, a lot of us that were modeling this out years ago had this view of, when an autonomous car hit a problem and suddenly alerted you to have some fraction of a second to figure out, to come out of your nap or your reading or your movie watching, grab the steering wheel, figure out what the problem was, and try to correct it. It would be a problem that a computer that reacts on milliseconds couldn't figure out, which means you probably get the first syllables of the scream out before you crashed. So a lot of has gone into redesigning rethinking what we're going to do with autonomous cars for that very reason, because they have to interact with people. And the reality is if they fail over, they can't fail over to people. They'll have to fail over to a redundant computer system because people can't do it. And that kind of goes to the heart of some of the problems with autonomous cities. And that's recognizing that these cities are going to be populated with people and the technology has to interrelate. And we're not really good at creating systems that people and computers work together seamlessly yet. So far, we tend to have systems that are either fully automated or have a large component of people that are operating the machines. That's going to change. Over this next decade, we're going to see a lot of interleaving between humans and automated systems, and working through the liability, working through the safety aspects will be one of our major problems. But back to your core point, the way that we build these cities that, as you point out, carry much of the load with regard to creation and economic growth, have to evolve is probably close to where we were with our colleges. Our colleges is a concept where the city, building, company, whatever, is self-contained, and you design it as a system where the food is grown in the city. And in fact, we've made some incredible advancements in terms of industrial scale farms that can be built in cities in terms of both cost and density. And they would be the core and probably the heart of a lot of these cities, because they're going to have to control their own environment, make sure that they can supply the food for their citizens, fresh water. If you've been watching, there have been a lot of advancements now talking about how we're going to begin to recycle water using a lot of the same technology we use in the International Space Station. Though I have a feeling that a lot of people are going to be coming to terms with this idea of you're going to be drinking recycled sewage water in order to satisfy your needs. But the fact of the matter is we don't have enough clean water. And one of the ways to address that is to clean it. If in California, for instance, they do have recycled sewage water, but it is relegated to irrigation. You're not allowed to drink it, even though in many cases it's cleaner and safer than the water that is coming in from the aquifers, because a lot of the aquifers in California have collapsed. So that's kind of it. It's a holistic approach. You have to think through how people and systems will interact. You have to be concerned about privacy and liability, and you have to recognize that whatever you're building, you're probably building for a world in 2035, 2040, because it takes you that long to get this stuff into place. And if you don't anticipate the future, much of what you're building is going to have to be yanked out before it's even brought into play. So it's a case of long-term planning and thinking through the implications of man-machine interfaces and interaction.
Okay, Dr. William.
Yes, well, first of all, I never thought of a central vacuum cleaner citywide, Alex, and so I learned so much new from you on any given program. I want to answer one of the questions that one of our viewers posed, and that is why is smart cities important for the 21st century? And I think in the course of this discussion, some of the issues have already been raised, both with sustainability and smart cities. Smart city technology and that approach and that mindset of the school of thought increases the ability for cities, administration by administration, because they are eventually run by people, to minimize the harmful effects of human activity, as well as minimize the beneficial comforts of living in a city. And I think, Dr. Sharif, some of the items that you highlighted is essentially that over the next, say, 20 to 30 years, the megacities that are currently being constructed, not necessarily intentionally, just by way of organic growth, are in the developing nations. And combine that with increase in population, which is also one of the facts that you highlighted, Dr. Sharif, suggests that at least insofar as cities are organically growing, we may have to look at the central core of the city, of that portion of the city that has already been established. But to the extent that there are additional add-ons and newer construction, as suburbs turn into part of the core of the city, I think where the helpful advice and insight Rob and Donald and even Ben and Alex are talking about, because we can target that so that it's not an all either or, it's an and both. So next, I kind of want to highlight what Ben spoke of with regard to the UN Secretary General. When he talked about, the COVID-19 being a blueprint or being a trial run of what's going on and how that might connect with regard to smart cities. We've already recently seen, at least here in the United States, and I suspect it's occurred other places as well, that we've had a problem with regard to the logistics with regard to supplies. That is to say that some of the vaccines have been found in places that nobody else knew that they were at. Now, a great deal has been made of the tracking of the shipments and with technology and barcodes and things of that nature. However, it's proven that even with that, and in an intentional way, there are gaps in our system. Now, that is just what the most recent example, but I want to get to this, the items that Alex implicitly raised, and that is disaster response. What we saw when it came to Puerto Rico, and also a number of the others after they were hit by a number of hurricanes, while the United States and other agencies around the world had pre-positioned supplies to be utilized after the emergency disaster passed through, it was discovered that about a year or so later, that a number of those areas had been forgotten in the rush to respond to the immediate need. And that is a long-term issue that the technology not only applied to smart cities, but also to disaster response and any future pandemic response with regard to pre-positioning of resources that will be needed for immediate relief as well as long-term relief, as well as in both pandemic medically, as well as infrastructure when it comes to hurricane relief, all of which goes back to this notion of climate change and global warming. I mean, we really can't get past any of that until we start to attack those things. And in that regard, when you start talking about monitoring and using data analytics to deal with where we can attack the problem, concentrations of excess production of CO2 and things of that nature are the areas that we can use the data and the system wide. So whether it's attacking crime, whether it's pre-positioning resources, whether it's making sure those resources get delivered during times of emergency or pandemics, are all matters that we may need.
Nice.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
I agree.
Apologize. Go ahead.
Yes, Dr. William.
Oh no,
yeah.
I'm saying that with the concept of the pre-positioning, so that there are multiple layers and multiple facets where the ideas and the concepts behind smart cities has the dual effect, because we are implementing them in some areas with regard to the COVID and what Ben had talked about. This being a trial run, we can use that because when you start talking about cities and the ability to efficiently run cities results in the savings of and waste reduction in a whole number of areas, which eventually we hope will cascade or have the ripple effect of impacting how we interact with our environment. Now, one thing that I am very curious of, and I'm really not sure what the answer is, but it's really kind of a directed question to Rob, and that is this: that when it comes to the issues of cars, I mean, just as a practical matter, I don't see how anyone's going to, give up their cars. And I don't mean to be or to convey self-centered. I'm certainly global in my ideas and concepts. But quite frankly, even 2035, I'm still going to be driving my car, whether or not there are, smart vehicles out there or not. And I'm not quite sure how we get over that fundamental.
Okay, I can answer the question. So the driver is going to be insurance premiums. Once autonomous cars are on the road, the autonomous car, and this actually comes out of the insurance industry, that they forecast that with autonomous cars, premiums will drop to about 10% of what they currently are, wherever you are. But the people that are driving the cars that are non-autonomous, they'll go up commensurately because the autonomous cars will drive with close tolerance. Human gets into that environment, you have to either increase the tolerance substantially, or you have to accept that when a human makes a mistake, instead of having 1 car accident, you'll have 10 or 20 car accidents, because you'll get a cascading failure. And so what will happen is the human-driven cars will go up substantially, or they'll be relegated to places like where there aren't a lot of cars. In other words, out in urban areas, you might be able to still drive your cars, much like you can still ride horses today in some areas. But freeways, you won't be allowed on freeways because of safety and liability issues, and that will drive the difference. So a lot of the discussion right now is whether we even own a car at that point, because in effect, once you've got full autonomy, I mean, recognize you waste a lot of money in a car. I don't know about you, but the statistics say that the cars are utilized somewhere between 3 and 5% of the time. The rest of the time, they sit unused, and so it's a tremendous waste of money and resources. And if you go to certainly something both Uber, Ford, and most of the other folks that are working around this issue are talking about, is you won't own a car. You'll just call a vehicle when you need it. It will show up. It'll drop you off, go recharge or whatever it needs to do, and then pick up the next passenger. So and those cars will be utilized, except when they're charging, 24/7, and so you get a much higher return on the investment. And so the Uber gets less and less expensive because you don't have human drivers anymore, and then the need for cars really only goes to those people that really are extremely wealthy, that can afford the insurance. And even so, Toyota has put forward the concept of guardian angel, which I think is probably going to be the prevailing concept with cars that are driven. And the way guardian angel works is if you do something stupid, the car automatically takes over control from you. It's very similar. You have that child seat that has the steering wheel, and that's kind of how you'll be driving. You think you're driving, but the computer's really driving itself. And if you're going too fast into a corner, or if you're reaching an area that has a lot of ice, regardless of where your foot is on the gas pedal, the car is going to slow down and drive safely. That's kind of the prevailing idea for how human-driven cars are probably going to have to go, so that they don't fall into the huge insurance premiums and create massive accidents and problems. But it really will probably be driven by the cost and liability, because if you look at how many people, we don't talk about this a lot, it's kind of a shame. Yeah. But one of the top killers are automobiles in both the developed and undeveloped world. And if you start taking down those massive death statistics, over 60,000 people dead a year, suddenly you start seeing where the liability would flow. They'd flow to the people that are still having accidents and away from the people that are not. So that's what drives the behavioral change. Is suddenly we recognize that cars are inherently unsafe when they're driven by humans, and the only way to fix that problem is to take humans out of the equation, either partially or completely. So that's the model the industry is working off of right now. But you're right in terms of public acceptance of driverless cars. Right now, you're in the majority. Most people would not accept a driverless car now, and recognize that even Ben's Tesla he was talking about before, Tesla's talking about it like it's a level 4 or 5 system. It's a level 2+ system. It is not safe autonomously driving in cities and autonomously driving anyplace else. And a lot of us are very concerned that those Teslas in California, they've had a couple catastrophic crashes with people that are kind of screwing around with the car and knowing full well they shouldn't have been letting the car drive itself. And the car has plowed into something and done a lot of damage, generally killing the driver. The Tesla X that crashed close to where I used to live in Silicon Valley, it was cut in half, and there wasn't much left of the driver when they finally got to him. And what was screwy is he knew that the driving system didn't work on that particular corner, and yet he still took his hands off the wheel and let the car kill him. So it's that kind of behavior that's kind of setting back the autonomous car movement. We're not taking into account the number of lives that will be saved enough. Whenever one of these cars crashes, it gets a high degree of visibility. We don't give car crashes in general a lot of visibility. There are probably car crashes that are happening around all of us pretty much all the time, and yet rarely, unless they take out a whole lot of people, did they make the news. So those things have to be fixed so we can roll out the technology.
Rob, I have one question. Sharif, may I?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, and Rob, this is what I'm really curious about. What what we're doing going back and forth with regard to the autonomous cars and such really raises a larger issue that's been implicated in our discussions across everything else. While we're showing the virtues of smart cities, inherent as its premise is that there's going to be a cost which people will see as freedom. And now with cars, you caught my attention, for example, because I was arguing, what about my personal freedom? You said, okay, well, you can have your personal freedom at an economic.
Yeah.
It changes my behavior, at least opens my eyes immediately. However, what about these other areas where when you talk about the integration between human activity and AI activity, because that's what we really need, and we're talking about with regard to smart cities. How are we going to deal with people just saying no? Because there's a cost to this efficiency by giving up your data, which is privacy. And some people are going to argue that's a cost of my personal freedom. How do you see the industry, or what do you see people doing to try to answer that question? Because that seems to me to be the fundamental point. People are just going to say no.
Well, the fact of the matter is they aren't saying no to the data thing, which is screwy. It's one of the things that keeps us all scratching our heads. I mean, if you think about how you interact with the social networks, you basically give up all your privacy in exchange for getting access to the social network free, and they make all the money off your data. So they're making billions off a resource that should inherently be yours. You don't care because you're able to use this social network for free and get access to a bunch of stuff. I tend to equate this to the story of the Indians getting beads for New York Island. We haven't wrapped our head around, individually wrapped our heads around the idea that our data, our information should be our own. We seem to be perfectly willing to sacrifice it. Where that's being pushed back is actually by government. The European Union has been the most aggressive, I think, in terms of enacting laws that protect individual privacy. But if it were left to us, we seem to have no problem giving up our information. Now, recognize with regard to smart cities, there are things like facial recognition that have run into hot water, huge, relatively large initiatives to block and stop the rollout of facial recognition programs, to a large extent because many of them are biased, that they were developed by older white men. They recognized older white men really well. They recognized women of color very poorly. In fact, embarrassingly, a lot of the systems early on were equating people of color with monkeys, which was incredibly divisive and upsetting. And one of the reasons why Google implemented an ethical program for their own AI development. And then if you watch, they just fired their key ethicist because she objected to some of the things that they were doing that she thought were unethical. And it showcases the kind of the tension right now in the AI community, where you've got a group of folks that just want to get this stuff out and implemented. And then there are another group that are raising their hand and saying, no, it's not ready. This stuff is biased. It is corrupt. And if we roll this stuff out and have it making decisions in milliseconds,
right,
millions of milliseconds, you're going to have huge problems that people are incapable of overcoming because we don't think that fast. And so the overall rise of ethics and ethical behavior and getting bias out of AIs, driven both by the public sector and by companies like IBM, who early on raised their hand and said, this is a serious problem that we need to address. You know, IBM exited, even though they had the leading solution for facial recognition. They exited facial recognition because they couldn't handle the negative coverage of the technology. And so rather than putting forth their own, they just said, yeah, no, we're out, which I don't think is a good thing. You get the companies that are driving ethics exiting because they can't take the negative press. That leaves the companies like Google, who are killing their ethical efforts, in as leaders. And that means we're going to end up with a bunch of unethical AIs, which will be a problem as we get into the 2030s and 2040s.
Okay, Professor Donald, how do you want to add like different perspective? I just want to go not only this driverless car issues, because for smart city development and sustainable city developments, there are many issues, especially energy consumptions. This issue is important. Beside that, yes, transportation also important.
I'm going to mention something very briefly about driverless cars, is that most people in cities don't drive cars. They have good public transportation, the majority. And the whole idea that people are tied to their cars is something that could be generational. young people, millennials, are buying cars at a much, much lower rate. Why? Because they live in cities. They don't need cars. And even now with the public transportation in cities, people are already not having cars. So that I see as something that just over fairly rapidly will change, and driving cars will, and all you have to do is have a sensor that shuts off the driver as soon as they get to a city. Just shut them off. They don't have the capability of driving it anymore, because it would be impossible to implement things like smart intersections where the cars, there's no traffic lights because the cars all know where they are. A driver couldn't do that. It's not possible. So, but fundamental to all of this is the data that needs to be transmitted. And right now, Stockholm, Singapore, various cities in the world, Taipei, they have way better internet connectivity than we do in most of the United States. It's a whole different kettle of fish. I mean, they have black fiber running everywhere. And so the response time for the possibility of having huge number of IoT devices exists. But in most American cities, we simply couldn't do it because we don't have the infrastructure to do it. Smart cities are already being implemented all over the world. And as I said, Singapore has had a smart city project for quite a while. Besides driverless cars, I have one startup that I worked with that knew how full trash cans were. And they used a mesh network to be able to transmit the data. So think about that. I mean, a smart city wouldn't have trash piling up anywhere because it would know where the trash was. It's almost infinite, the kinds of things that you can do besides transportation. You could, water usage. It's important to understand what IoT devices are. The Internet of Things. They're sensors that can be used to sense almost anything. Finland, for instance, has been for years putting, as I mentioned in an earlier show, they have sensors in lakes because there's 100,000 lakes or something in Finland, and they're precious to the Finns. The lakes are just a precious resource to them. And at one time they were built, one of Finland's biggest products of all things is paper mills and steel mills. They actually build them in other countries. It's an engineering project that, in a sense, they export these these factories. And the paper mills were dumping stuff into the lakes, and they were wrecking the lakes. And so the Finns just didn't like that at all. And they made laws completely against it, and they figured out ways to process the waste. So now they have sensors everywhere. So if somebody starts doing something like that, they know it immediately, and they go there and say, "What are you doing? You've got to fix this right now." And we, in the United States, we're way behind. But I see the idea, as I said, of just shutting off the cars, because most people in cities don't drive anyway. I mean, you're nuts to have a car in New York City. I mean, there's no place to park it. Driving it is absolutely horrible. My brother lived in New York and he had a car, but he kept it in Connecticut. And he would take the train to Connecticut so that he could drive his car up to the places where he could go camping and things like that. But he never used it in the city. And he lives in San Francisco now, and he takes BART. Mm-hmm. The whole idea of being sustainable, if you go to Portugal, like Lisboa, around the whole city, there's gardens. So the food that you eat in Lisboa and many Portuguese cities is actually grown right outside the city and trucked in. There's been some criticism of logistics, and that's a huge problem. But in some senses, I've read studies that in some places, local agriculture and farmers markets use more pollution than the distribution of someplace like Walmart or Safeway, because they're so efficient at their distribution that they use less energy. And I think that where we need to look to figure out how to do these things, and the US military did it, is look at Walmart. They have the most effective distribution system and logistics of anyone. And that's one of the reasons they can have such low prices. So the idea of being Robinson Crusoe and just cutting yourself off from the world and living as an individual that's not connected to anything, it won't work. It just won't work. But as we concentrate people more into cities, then we have more available land for other things like nature and food. So the whole idea of a sustainable city has to be a city that's connected to the world around it. And as I say, innovation takes place from borrowing one thing from one place into another. So the connections that we have between the different countries and the different cities and things like that are highly beneficial to us. This anti-globalization, you have to think really hard about what you mean here, because the thing that Trump's doing of rolling up the borders, where all of a sudden our universities aren't getting the best and the brightest people from all of the world like we have for years. And a sustainable city has to be a connected city, not just internally, but externally as well.
Thank you. Mr. Alex, like you are expert of sustainability and this kind of things. Even in Singapore, we are observing that they do more emphasis on lab-grown food and different kind of technologies actually developing in Singapore. Beside that, even in Malaysia, Sunway City, they are trying to develop a better ecosystem. But my question is that, like, in the COVID situations, like this is the things that maybe there are some strategic changes, and we will observe next few years for sustainabilities and other things. So what do you think? What will be the better strategy for this smart city sustainability, as well as in developing nations, they are thinking right now about smart village sustainability? What do you want to add?
What I want to add is here in Santa Cruz, and what I've seen when I lived in Reno, Nevada, and other places, is the more educated we all are in sustainability, in these new technologies, and what a sustainable city is, the more we have to participate with this city council. Here, I guess, as most city councils are around the United States, I'm not sure how all of the councils work in different places around the world. You have the ability to go and talk on the microphone for a few minutes and give them your input, and then they actually vote on if they're going to create a roundabout or if they're going to put in a new building, and how they're going to design the city with the city planners and management and all of that. So I think with individuals having the knowledge, they can give their input to the city council and the planning department. So it's not just the planning department making all the decisions. The general public does have a say so when they design things certain ways. So I guess getting involved in politics, engineering, and knowing as much as you can about sustainable cities would be a good route and a good career opportunity. I wanted to mention that there's multiple forms of water recycling. So here in Santa Cruz, we actually don't drink recycled water. We get our water from aquifers, and then a percentage from the creek, from the dam that we have here in Santa Cruz. So then it's filtered and cleaned at a water treatment facility, and then we drink it. So all of our waste actually goes to a water treatment facility, and some of the gray water gets separated and water some plants, but it gets dumped back out into the San Lorenzo River and back out into the ocean. So we have a system where we drink clean water from aquifers in the river and creeks, and then all of our wastewater gets filtered and back out into the ocean. Other communities recycle water. That's why we're seeing a problem with pharmaceuticals. So hopefully we find more and better ways to recycle pharmaceuticals from the water. So when we're talking about privacy, facial recognition, all this data, I know it's a huge step in the right direction with sustainability and smart cities, but then we are getting, like the other gentleman mentioned, the pushback from all the people that are like, no, it's Big Brother, oh, it's tech, oh, it's the government. So there's a huge need for us to be sustainable using technology to get to that point, but then all these conspiracy theorist people, and actually some real concerns like we saw in China and what they were trying to do there. So I think there's just a balance in between how many cameras and how much invasive information we're collecting for people, and for what means we're collecting that information. Is it for, government oversight, or is it for the sustainability of the city? So I did want to mention long-term planning, how important that is when you're retrofitting a city or designing a city, this taking everything into accountability. We are going to see more disasters in the future. And from my experience covering disasters, there's a lot of times where there's debris on the road, even with light windstorms, there's trees on the road. And I'm going to make that choice in my car if I'm going to go around the tree or drive over the tree branch to get to where I need to go safely. Now with automated cars, I'm wondering when they're going to make that decision. If I am in the car with my girlfriend, if I had a child, and I know that if I go over something dangerous to get to safety, like that's what I need to do, when is the car going to say, no, I'm not going to drive over that? Like, when could I take that decision? So that's what I'm concerned about, because there is going to be decisions where I think that we should have the choice, especially when disasters are a disaster. There's not going to be little yellow dots in the road that the car is going to follow along with, stuff like that. So I think solar windows are really exciting, that we're going to see more of those with some of the new buildings and incorporating solar windows technology in with new buildings. I think skylights are also important, using natural light to lower our electrical dependence, and I think that's important. Obviously, rainwater catchment should be incorporated in as many new building designs as possible. With electric cars, again, I want to mention single point location, so single source pollution. So fossil fuel driven cars, that's pollution in multiple sources. So in a city with all of these combustion engines, that's releasing carcinogenic toxins everywhere, and pollution and greenhouse gases. We can't capture that. So when we have electric cars, and even if it's running off coal or anything bad, we could possibly catch that pollution, and there's not multiple points of pollution. With all the cars, it's less polluting. So just that's another cool thing to research if you're watching this video. Single point pollution versus multiple point pollution when it comes to electrical cars and the benefits. Like Donald said, I am a huge supporter of hyperloops, how that would connect cities, how that would be more efficient in cities, subways, as long as it's not at low elevation coastal areas. There is a lot of individual transportation. I mean, we're seeing not just like rollerblades and bikes and skateboards, we're seeing a lot of electric, so many cool electric things that they have out now when it comes to the scooters, the bicycles, the skateboards, the one-wheel skateboard type thing. And then there's also just the typical bus and train, and we're going to see more of those, and they're going to become more efficient. Cities, we haven't touched upon how cities are just more efficient when it comes to heating and cooling. And one of the reasons why Donald was saying it's just unrealistic to go out and live in the country, I mean, that lifestyle we see in different places around the world. It is possible. There's documentaries and videos on the people doing it in Alaska. Unfortunately, the main concern with that is medical, not having access to medical. So if you're working on a project and you cut yourself, if you're having a heart problem or any medical issue, you have to, that's one of the huge disadvantages of living out in the wilderness or on a homestead, and a huge advantage to living in a smart city, to having access to medical. So China is one of the only countries I know of that's just, well, in Dubai, China is the one country that's just building that whole new city from scratch and designing as smart as possible. And I'm not sure the current progress on that or how far they've come along. And then they're implementing government incentives to get more people to move to that city, and they're starting to build it. They've been working on it for like a decade now, I think. It's really cool and something to learn more about. One of the last things that I want to add that's very, very concerning for me, and it's really broad. It's EMTs and coronal mass ejections when it comes to smart cities, technology, or anything digital. So that puts countries vulnerable towards nuclear attack with EMTs, which stands for electric magnetic pulse, and then coronal mass ejections happen from the sun, and I think the sun flares.
You mean EMPs? You mean EMPs?
Oh, thank you.
EMTs are medical personnel.
Oh, thank you.
EMP.
Thank you. EMP, electronic magnetic pulse. Thank you. And then coronal mass ejections. Oh, so the EMP comes from a nuclear weapon or a device that's above a city, and it sends a pulse, and it shuts down any electrical device that's not protected. And there are ways to protect it, but I don't think we're implementing that into smart cities. Now, coronal mass ejections are sun flares that happen, I think, every 11 years, or when they're more serious, or there's like a time frame. Correct me when I'm wrong. Now, those coronal mass ejections are a sun flare coming off the sun, and it sends that EMP pulse to Earth. And usually we have like a day or two to prepare for it. But in the past, a few decades ago, they fried electrical wires, and they caused huge electrical outages around the United States and huge portions of the world because it was so serious. So when we design smart cities, we do have to take that into consideration. Otherwise, all of this is going to be pointless, and everything that we've created is just going to fry and burn, and we're not going to be able to do anything and drive our cars. So that's a huge concern, because that is going to happen on a long enough timeline. Coronal mass ejections.
Thank you, Mr. Raw. I think you can add many things what will happen in the future, specifically in technology industry. Even in Asia Pacific, I just want to add one point that China Belt and Road Initiative actually moving very fast, but we want to know more about the US context.
Well, certainly in the U.S., there's been, with the current administration, there's been little interest in smart cities, little interest even in electronic security. If we go back to the prior administration, for instance, talking about security, which I think is core to what Alex was talking about, is how do we secure these systems as they're going in. There was a huge industry-wide effort under Obama to secure the United States against attack. And of course, we just had an attack by Russia that went undiagnosed for months, largely because those systems weren't implemented. And in talking to one of the companies that was driving that initiative, they said, once President Trump came in, there was no appetite for looking at security. And in fact, he pulled much of the budget from security to build his wall. So we building a defense against a problem we really didn't have, and taking it away from a problem that was critical, has become problematic underneath the current administration. But it showcases how much damage a government can do to its own initiatives and its own willingness to make the world a safer place. Alex was also talking about coronal events. We're in the midst of a coronal event right now. The technology today is developed with the idea of being able to sustain itself through much of that. Granted, an EMP, an air blast from an atomic weapon, would be problematic, but it's problematic for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is the radioactive fallout that such an event would cause, likely killing most of the folks in the city over which the atomic explosion occurred. So at the end, the industry is aware of a lot of the difficulty. I would say the biggest problem right now is the lack of overall coordination across a nation state, outside of South Korea, Singapore, which are two examples, and Dubai, I would point out, is another area that seems to be leading in terms of thinking through these problems before they build, though they are doing some crazy stuff. The flying police cars are a bit fascinating, as are the exotic police cars they've deployed in that state. But if you've got a lot of money, maybe you might as well have fun with it, I guess. But in the end, it really is the fact that our administrators, our governments, tend to think in terms of initiatives that happen within their term. And companies tend to think of initiatives that happen within a quarter, and that makes it very difficult to drive sustaining change, because these changes have to occur over periods of time that we measure in decades. And if governments don't think strategically about how life is going to be in 2030, they won't plan for it. And much of the problems that we have with regard to weather events come from the fact that we've known of the problems that caused the disasters well ahead of time. New Orleans being an example of a city that was built below sea level that should have been heavily and well designed to survive floods. Yet, and they do have massive pumps, but those pumps cannot stand, or at least didn't stand up to power outages, because their electrical and the fallback and failover wasn't adequate to prevent the huge floods that occurred last decade, which once again were predictable. We knew they were going to happen, but governments did not prioritize against a problem that they couldn't specifically point to as happening within a year or within a 4-year term. So a lot of our issue really has to do with the fact that we do not as a race think strategically. We do not as a race look at statistics and take them against the things that we want to do and change our behavior. The rebellion against masks, for instance, is a case in point. Doing things that are incredibly stupid with the idea that for some reason or shape or form it protects our freedom, when instead we should be protecting the lives and the lives of our loved ones. So there's the problem where we are focusing a lot of our AI effort right now, is to find a way to use AIs to supplement people so they make better decisions and they get the data that they need to make those decisions. Then, of course, we can then implement smart cities that are truly smart and not likely death traps, which we undoubtedly will have in some of these efforts where they're not properly secured, they are not properly protected, and they don't properly interrelate with other systems, and we'll have cascading failures that will cause deaths in large numbers if we don't get our arms around this.
Thank you, Dr. William.
Yes. Well, let me just start by answering a question that one of our audience members, and then I want to circle back and touch on the points that both Alex and Rob mentioned. Exactly this question. That's a different kind of question. That comes with air quality of life.
What question you're answering?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was what are the criteria to become the most livable city in the world? And that's a real. It seems to me, as an observation, from my small vantage point, and that's a comprehensive question, because it takes into you would have to take into account a number of different things. Your health, most importantly, safety, climate, the work-life balance, as well as the environment. All of these things that go into what makes you happy, and that would include mental health as well. So becoming the most livable city in the world takes different interpretations. Some people might say, for example, in Dubai, they're building this stuff, but they have the resources to execute their vision. Other places, it might be, for them, the most livable place in the world could be a small community. Perhaps utilizing renewable resources.
Dr. William, can you hold for a second? Everybody that's not talking, could you mute your mics? Because we're getting a lot of noise in, and it makes it hard to hear Dr. William. Donald, I'm talking to you, buddy, because you're the one producing most of the noise.
I am.
Okay. So I guess with regard to the most livable city in the world, it depends on your vision and the resources and the value and the priorities that you place the utmost value on. And I'm quite, I've lived a number of different places, and everywhere I've lived, it has its own qualities. For example, major cities, because you have access to any number of things, immediate healthcare, latest technologies, transportation, and then arts and the culture, and fantastic. But sometimes rural communities with the simplicity of life and the peace and quiet and better environment are in fact places that are desirable and helpful to live in. And of course, what you consider to be the most livable kind of city changes as you age, so that when you're younger, perhaps you want a more dynamic kind of environment where you can have access to a number of things. And then as you grow old, well, then if you have children, or you place a priority on raising a family, you're going to obviously emphasize safety and well-being and education and the kind and activities for the children, and those kinds of values that are important when you consider raising a family. And then as some people reach the age of retirement, although I think that's, just as a side note, is becoming more of an anachronism, because I don't think that people really are going to be retiring in the future. They're just going to continue to educate themselves and go into different areas, which I think is ultimately a positive benefit. But nevertheless, historically speaking, people that have retired wanted to go to communities where most of the matters were taken care of them. We call them here in the U.S. retirement communities. So the world's most livable city will undoubtedly depend on what your values are at the stage in life that you're in and what you're valuing. I think another way to look at it, though, is to say, how can we obtain the best possible results from each of those individualized kinds of cities, so that when we have mega cities, how can we make that the best mega city for the people that are living there, so that sustainability, reduction in costs, health, protection of the environment, community parks, which contribute to mental health. So we really ought to be thinking about it in terms of that city, what those people value, and how we can make that environment, that community, the best it can possibly be, so that we have a free range rather than a superimposed kind of standard for everyone, because one size does not necessarily fit all. Now, what I would like to just circle back for quickly on this, and that is, I don't think, at least my sense is, and of course this is just my observation, I don't think that we have really given enough time to the very serious issues that have been raised by both Alex and Rob, and that is this notion of security and privacy, and the collection of data versus and balancing that with protection of freedom. Because as it's rightly pointed out, some people will see that you achieve freedom by aggregating data so that we make our lives easier. But some people define freedom as their ability to do whatever they want. Now, Ben earlier in the program cited that his son said one of the first outgrowths is that he wouldn't be able to rob a bank because the car would keep stopping. And while humorous and certainly insightful, particularly for a 13-year-old, some people there are going to be bad actors, and they're going to want to be able to, do whatever they want. And you can't necessarily control all of that or change all that, nor should we expect to have that kind of 100% achievement level with regard to people. And while a bank robbery might be a bad example, what about people that just want to drive on their motorcycles and take a country drive? That's a different priority. And so it seems to me, so that's kind of the balance of freedom and stuff. But underscoring all of that, the security and the privacy, I don't think that we give enough thought to. Because first of all, with security, to the extent that we have this aggregation and the influence and and we realize the beneficial value of AI, which undoubtedly will make our lives better, the question is the attacks on the system. As Rob pointed out, with the recent attack from the sustained multi-month period of the attack from Russia. So that while we were all worried about the last Great War, which was the attack on our election system, Russia had just taken a step forward and turned their attention on anything else. And those were all of our major governmental hubs: State Department, energy, the financial systems. And so all of that stuff comes with, and then of course, when Alex raised the issue of EMPs, that is just not necessarily an intentionally malicious attack on our system, but that is also an issue of privacy and security of our system as we move forward. And I cannot, at least from my point of view, emphasize enough that we need to spend more and more time. I mean, I'll be the first to cheerlead and extol the virtues and motivational speeches about all the benefits that we can get from using AI and in technology to improve our lives collectively and around the globe, through the allocation of resources, identification of problems. But we also have to realize that there is this major Achilles heel, and that we have to on dealing with those issues, because it's great, but if it can be crippled in a day, a week, a month, or a year, then it's
Okay, thank you, Professor Donald. Like in terms of innovations and other things, already Mr. Rock come up with a very interesting technology we need to adapt. So what are the things that you want to add for today? Professor Donald.
You're muted.
So that noise wasn't me. I was muted. If you look at the Economist Intelligence Unit of the most livable cities in the world, there's none in the United States. In fact, the best one in the United States is Honolulu, which is like 55th or something like that. Number one is Vienna. And I looked at the criteria that they use for livability is a combination of art, transportation, things that you can do, and health, of course, as has been pointed out, is number one. Of you want to be able to be healthy, obviously, which is a combination of resources like hospitals and doctors and the environment itself. Like if the air is bad and the water is bad, you can't really be, it's harder to be healthy. So I'm kind of bouncing off what other people have said, that when we look at livability and sustainability, the technology is part of it, and it's getting to be more of a part. In fact, when people talk about smart cities, they're talking about the technology. But to make a sustainable city, we have to have an environment that people care to live in. So I think that's something that's really worth thinking about. And one of the things I think that's been like underlying all of the stuff that we've been talking about is, where is this stuff going to come from? Where are the sensors going to come from? Where are the different kinds of things that we need going to come from? And when governments try and make stuff in general, what winds up happening is that they don't have enough feedback to be able to do it correctly. Like when they started the Russian state, it was very well intentioned, and statistics were fairly new at the time. I mean, the kind of statistics that we use. And they reasoned that based on new statistical models, they could predict what they could basically centrally control manufacturing, distribution, and all those kinds of things. And it didn't work. They'd wind up with, thousands of tractors, tens of thousands of tractors that weren't used, and there was no feedback from the market. So where innovation comes from in Silicon Valley is small people looking at the individual problems, finding the individual problems and solving them. Now I remember that EMP event that happened. Well, no, sorry, the solar flare that happened. And it was only one place in the United States that actually, where the electrical system was fried. It wasn't a general problem. But if it is a problem, it's an opportunity. All problems are opportunities. And all of the different things that we have to consider, like art and safety and all those kinds of things, are things that go into making a good and healthy city. So that's really all I have to say, is that as far as security is concerned, I want to mention that one more time, a little bit, that's an interesting kettle of fish. I mean, I've worked with transmission of from a phone. Basically, I wrote some software that transferred billing records from Switch to the central office, and how. In that particular case, it would have been impossible for somebody to get in and change it. And most of our infrastructure is not tied to the internet, but of that kind. I mean, our power systems and things like that are not really tied to the internet, so they can get to a certain level but they can't get past a certain level. However, I think that security has like two aspects of it. One is the aspect of trying to reassure people that they're safe, and the other aspect is actually implementing it. So that again is an opportunity. That's a complicated thing, but it's something that's an opportunity for people to work out to a higher degree. And then the last thing I want to say is I lived in Finland and I was trying to do research on social networks there. The social network is a term that's been used since 1845. It's not in the way I use it, it doesn't have anything to do with websites. The name was stolen or borrowed by a guy named Clay Shirky in about 2002 and applied to the software. But when I say social networks, I'm talking about the networks of relationships that people have in their life. And I tried to do some study on that in Finland, and I found out that the privacy laws said, no way, you can't even do it at the university. You couldn't even do it as a academic project at the university. It just can't be done. It's absolutely against the law. And they've tightened security regulations since then. That was in 2008. So how we're going to implement, countries like Singapore can just kind of say, well, tough. You don't have that right to privacy. China can do that. Countries that have a more centrally controlled state can do that. So I kind of see that smart cities are something that are going to be taking place in the developing world and not in some place like the United States. I don't see it happening here for a long time, because this whole notion of freedom, I mean, Facebook has my data. What effing difference does it make if they know what I'm just this anonymous person that they don't care about at all. So there's security through obscurity. I mean, maybe if you're robbing a bank, there's some reason to want to identify your particular car, but in a smart city, why would anybody care where you're driving? You're just a data point within an anonymous data point. So I think some of the security issues are kind of bogus, but we do want to protect our infrastructure from bad guys getting in. I mean, there's a whole idea that somebody can figure out how to control your car. So anyway, that's that.
Thank you. I think Mr. Rob and Dr. William, both of them want to share something. I want to start with Mr. Rob.
Yeah, so talking about security, the issue comes down to whether or not you trust the government. I mean, that's it. If you trust the government, then giving them all your data, or you trust Facebook or Google, then giving them all your data isn't a problem. But if you don't trust them, if you don't feel they're going to act in your best interest, then giving them all your data gives them power over you. They know what you browse on the web. They know where you go, where you shouldn't be going. They know both the good and the bad for you. And the concern, of course, is they'll use that information against you. Large companies that use that information to get you to buy things you might not otherwise buy. Governments would use that information to silence you, to certainly motivate you to do things that are consistent with what it is they want you to do. Certainly, we saw the implications of this not in the last two elections. Obama used data about people very effectively to drive up votes. When he ran for office, Trump did the same thing, not directly. He had people that did it for him because I'm not sure he can spell technology. But the fact of the matter is it was very effective. And you can get people to do, and it's actually what he did that nobody else really did, is it's created false information trails so that people were motivated to do things based on belief rather than fact. And if they know that you're susceptible to that, you know that you have interests to that, and they can closely target, they can get you to do things that are exactly against your best interests. And we've certainly seen that play out. So I do agree with Don that we can't make good decisions or even create viable smart cities without collecting information. But protections have to be on that information, and it comes back to trust. If you establish institutions that you can trust, then it doesn't matter what it is they do. On the other hand, if you don't trust the institutions, then you probably should fix that part first before you give them a lot of power and allow them to go off and do things. Because if they're untrustworthy, giving them power will only do you harm. And so we have a kind of a catastrophe of trust going on in the world right now, where the people that have the power to a large extent are untrustworthy, and the people that have had power taken from them are the victims of that result. And so creating a way to assure that governments and large companies won't do you harm becomes a much higher priority in this connected world. Because if you don't address that issue, then these entities will do you harm, and the end result could be dire. I'll pass over to Dr. William now.
Oh no, Rob, thank you for summarizing all of that. The only item I would add is simply this: is that in contradistinction to Donald's theory, at the end of the day, that might be great. That there may be a school of thought that says, so what if they have all of your information? I tend to come from the school of thought that says, listen, it's my choice. Just like Rob pointed out, maybe I do, maybe I don't. But if at the end of the day, it should be my choice about what I want done, because that's the bargain I make for living in a free society. And so if I'm not doing anything wrong, then I should not necessarily be forced into making a decision that forces me into something that may have unintended adverse consequences. But, quite frankly, I don't know. And one of the things, if freedom means anything, it seems to me, and that it comes down to, I should have a choice. It's not saying I'm not going to do it, not saying I'm going to do it. But at the end of the day, barring any nefarious activities that I may or may not be engaged in, the question becomes: do I have a choice in having that information collected? Because then, fundamentally, if I don't have that choice, then we are talking about our entire governmental systems, and because then you'd be talking about a governmental structure much akin to that of China, where they can just go in and they can censor the internet and limit people's choices and tell them that they have the veneer of freedom. But meanwhile, they are cutting off all kinds of avenues and then directing their people in a certain area. The same is true. Now, that's an old debate between an autocratic or a dictatorial kind of form of government or a form of government that says, hey, listen, let's do what we need to do for our collective security. And let's understand that there are certain commonalities that we need protected. And then absent any kind of massive adverse reaction, say, for example, then it should be up to the individual. And quite frankly, I'm of the school of thought that says that, listen, I ought to have a right. Now, I understand that people are going to exercise their right to choose in some really dumb ways, like not wearing a mask or just being stupid about stuff or work against their own economic interests. But that fundamentally is their choice. So the question that you would have to ask yourself is that, do you want to live in a society where you place the value on your ability to be an engaged, conscientious person that makes choices based on your values and where you want to live? Or do you just want to be caught up in the anonymous kind of grind of a machinery that you have no control over? So with that added, I just want to double down and say everything that Rob said. So Rob, ditto.
Well, that doesn't contradict what I said. What I said was that smart cities are probably not going to be, they're going to be a long time in the United States, but cities like Singapore, where they do have more control over how people work, are going to have smart cities sooner, because that's a necessary part of it, and they do. They're light years ahead of us.
Donald,
kind of light years ahead of us.
Donald, you missed my point. I was pointing out that your underlying premise was simply this. You said, and I will paraphrase, if not quote, you said, what does it matter if Facebook has all of my data? I'm just an anonymous person, and what do I care about any of this if they have my information? And my
sidebar, it doesn't have anything to do with smart cities.
Donald, a couple of days ago, you were talking about interrupting people. So I just wanted to.
Sorry.
Okay, so please. So here, I just wanted to make the point that, quite frankly, I mean, that's your point of view, and that's great for you. And you have the right to exercise that point of view. But I'm suggesting that there's a school of thought out there, one of which I'm a proponent for, which says I get to make that decision. If I want to hand over my data, fine. Maybe that's a bargain I want to make. But fundamentally, I ought to have that right. I ought to have that choice. Because if I don't have that choice, then why aren't I living in some other place or some other country? Why wouldn't I move there where I wholesale sign a social contract that says I'm giving up these rights so I can then have these benefits, and then I accept the consequences of that? But we don't live in that kind of society, and that, I think, is a very important point in this overall discussion, which is why security and privacy ought to be front and center, because there are going to be those of us that are just going to say, I don't know. And that should be respected as well.
If I could add something, it's more than security and privacy. I think the issue is transparency. As long as the entity collecting the data is transparent about what they're doing about it, and you agree with what they're doing with that data, you're probably good. The issue we've got right now, though, is that entities that are capturing data, whether we're talking about the big data site, NSA data site that's in the middle of the country, or Facebook or Google, and both Facebook and Google are under antitrust clouds at the moment partially for their use of data and control, is that we have to be comfortable with what they're using the data that they're collecting from us for, and if we're not, then they shouldn't be getting the data. The caveat shouldn't be we give them the data and we hope they do the right thing with it. The caveat should be we give them the data and they are required to do the right thing with it. And if they're not going to do it, then we don't give them the data. Right now, what we're doing is we're providing the data, but we don't have the transparency to know what the hell they're doing with it, and we really don't have much of a vote with regard to where the data is going. I mean, you can certainly log off of Facebook or off of Google, but their trackers are tracking you every place you go on the web. They're still capturing the data whether you go on Facebook or not, and that's a problem. Now, the EU has ruled against that, saying that that's absolutely illegal, and these guys get in trouble for breaching those rules pretty much on an annual basis. So I think the issue is we have to require transparency, and then that they have to be relegated to doing what the people will allow them to do with the data. And what millennials, and Don moved up, talked about millennials not caring. We surveyed millennials a while back, and the vast majority of them said, fine, you can have our data, but if we ever catch you doing something against us with the data, God save you. You're okay to use it, you just can't use it against me. And that's the part we seem to be missing, is that desire to make sure that people are taking the data from us are using it for our benefit and not to our detriment. And without transparency, we can never be sure. Sorry, Donald, you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, you basically if you understand how cookies work and why cookies are there, it's because HTML is stateless. So that means when you send your web page to the server, it totally forgets that you did that. The next time you send a web page to the server, it doesn't know what you did previously. So what was implemented was these things called cookies, which were little pieces of information that are saved about you on the server. So the next time you send a web page, it remembers what you did previously. Completely harmless. It was just simply a way of working around the stateless nature of HTML. Over time, people realized that they could they could add more information to the cookies on the browser side and then use that information for other purposes. And that was something that no one could predict. That happened just because people were using it and they got the idea, oh, we can do this, we can do this. So it wasn't planned at all. So some of these things we have to look at retroactively. If you go to a website now, there's a banner that appears on the bottom by law that says you have a choice of opting out of this. We can use your data. You can opt into us using your data so that we can give you a better experience, or you can opt out of us using your data. It's a law. It's the European Union made this law, and now everyone has to do it because websites appear in the European Union. And the difficulty happened with the question of censorship when you look at Facebook or Twitter, and that the Facebook took a more libertarian kind of view that anybody that you had unlimited freedom of speech and that they weren't going to do anything. And Twitter took the view that they did have some responsibility for what was going on. And so now, if you go to any tweet by Trump, it's got a opaque thing over it that says, this is false information, and a link to some place where you can get actually accurate information. And even Facebook is doing it. If you talk anything about the election, a little thing appears saying that, here's where you can get accurate information about the election, because nobody knew that these things were going to happen. The artificial deep learning and some of the new artificial intelligence techniques are quite new. They're maybe now 7 or 8 years old at the most. And so we have to think of things. The European Union's working on it very hard. But if you want to have a smart city, you have to know where the cars are. And that's that. It's just not going to, if you want to control traffic in a smart city, you have to know where the cars are. It wouldn't work otherwise. And there's a lot of, who cares whether a trash can is, somebody knows your trash can is full. We need to have the ability to control things, and we're implementing it. It was something we didn't know was going to be a problem. Found out it was a problem. Now we're implementing it. But it doesn't take away from what I said. You may not want to live in China. You may not want to have these kinds of things happening, but they're necessary to implement the kind of smart cities that are possible. I know people that live in Singapore, and Singapore has always been restricted. It's famous that if you leave chewing gum on the sidewalk, you can get in trouble. But people from Singapore tell me, I feel free. I don't feel like I'm not free. So those are a lot to do with attitudes. And I see that as we find the problems and address them, I can see that people are going to be less restrictive to it. I think it's kind of an age thing.
Well, it is an age thing. The thing I want to add, though, is that Don points out it's who cares about full or empty trash cans. Recognize we've had a series of fairly serious problems with regard to the distribution of information. So, for instance, people find out that when folks post on Facebook that they're on vacation, that they're away from home, and then they break into their home and either have a party or they rob the house. The same thing with regard to trash cans. If trash cans are over full, it looks like somebody's away from the home. If the folks that want to rob you get that information, they will rob you because you're away from the home. That's why the control of data is so important, is because that data can be used against you, whether it's to manipulate your vote, get you to buy something that you don't want to buy, which is relatively benign, or it's to break into your house and steal your stuff. That's all things that have happened on record. So information is in fact power, and if you view information as one of these things that you just kind of spread out there and magically it will good things will happen, that's not the world we live in. People abuse power, and you give them a lot of power in terms of your information, they will undoubtedly abuse it unless there's oversight and there are enforced rules to prevent them from doing that. And our issue in the United States is we haven't really been good at that. In fact, I'd say governments historically have been bad at this because they tend to wait until there's a catastrophe, then they overreact and often do more damage than good. Remember 9/11? 9/11, the number of people that died on 9/11, we're now losing on a daily basis due to COVID. And yet we almost put the air transportation industry out of business with our overreaction to that. All we had to do was change one rule. That was the rule that had pilots going along with hijackers because we believed that was the safest path. Just change that one rule. You don't have another 9/11. Instead, we implemented a ton of things that make travel painful. And most of the tests indicate these things don't even work. If people really want to get weapons into planes, they can still get weapons into planes. It's just we tried to make people feel safe as opposed to be safe. So in the end, I'm still back to my premise: is you have to have transparency. You have to be comfortable with the people getting your data, that they'll be on your side and not against you. Otherwise, you're going to create more problems than you're going to create good. By the way, that's not just my position. That's kind of the industry position at the moment. Because the companies recognize this stuff blows up, it's going to blow up all over them too. They don't want these disasters any more than anybody else does. And of course, Google and Facebook are being reminded this year that not doing this stuff right can be incredibly expensive. Both companies are looking at a very likely possibility they're going to be out of business in 2 years. And all they had to do is be a bit more transparent. And Google even started off saying, we're not going to be evil. And one of the big clues should have been that when they disabled that motto, that was a bad thing. They argued that, we just can't do this. The whole evil thing is just too onerous. Yeah, maybe not. I mean, if you're thinking that not being evil is too onerous, you've got a problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
I want to say one little thing.
Okay.
Could I? Just one little thing. When a self-driving car gets in an accident, why would the driver be liable?
Oh,
I'm asking Rob. Why would they be liable? It's a self-driving car company that screwed up.
Well, right now that the way they've written it is the driver always has responsibility for the vehicle. So you're right. If a self-driving car, if you're talking about a level 4 or 5 car, which we don't have now, best we have on the road right now are level 2+ cars. But the way they're getting around with it, in fact, the argument is we're never going to have a level 5 car because a level 5 car is a car that can go any place autonomously. And that's because the car companies don't want the liability. It comes back to liability. So you're right. You have a level 5 car, it gets into an accident. Right now, that liability should flow to the car company. But now imagine if you had a software bug, and you had 10,000 cars had accidents as a result of that bug. Car companies out of business. So even if they have level 5 technology, they will not promote it as level 5 technology because their belief is if the driver is told that in a problem situation, the driver has to take control, and if the driver doesn't take control, that caused the accident, then the driver is still liable. That's where we are. So Don, you're right that an autonomous car that has a problem should be held, the manufacturer should be held accountable. Right now, there's a huge pushback against that because they don't want to be accountable. And then you were talking about keeping track of cars. Now the cities had to keep track of cars. Right now, the V2V technology, which is the vehicle-to-vehicle technology, that's being used to coordinate cars and things like traffic lights. Right now, the cities are blocking communication with the traffic lights because they don't want the liability if the traffic lights report something different. So if the car's told it's a green light, but the light is actually red, and so the human drivers don't stop, but the autonomous cars continue to go through, then you have an accident, and then the city is liable. The city says, nope, I don't want liability for that either, so I'm not going to allow your cars to talk to our stoplights, and therefore we're not going to implement that technology. Stupid, because implementing the technology would save thousands of lives, but the cities are more concerned with the liability than they are with the life savings. And same thing with the car companies. They're more concerned about the liability because they recognize that liability could put them out of business than they are about implementing technology that they could implement to make the car safer. So solving that liability problem is kind of at the crux of autonomous car issues right now. One more thing. If you look out at tractor-trailer rigs, semi-tractor trailer rigs, right now we're short somewhere between 180,000 and 300,000 drivers. We can't put enough trucks on the roads. We could automate them and put those trucks on the road. The problem there is the truck unions are against it because they think they're going to put drivers out of jobs. But right now we're short drivers in the hundreds of thousands. And one of the issues, of course, we can't bring immigrants in to drive the trucks because the government won't let us do it. And that's creating huge logistics problems that we could solve. Now, the industry is arguing that what's going to happen is we're going to take this job, which is a horrible job. I mean, you can get them if you want to drive a truck, you can make $80,000 a year. They will train you. They'll let you take your wife along with you. They're doing everything they can to try because it's just a horrible, boring as hell. and you get other drivers getting in front of you doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So the industry is saying, well, we'll turn the drivers into a purser. There'll be an account, there'll be security for the trucks, but they won't actually have to drive the truck, and they can watch TV and do the other stuff. Union still says no, because drivers are drivers, and the underlying problem is if they're accountants, they probably belong to another union, and the union doesn't want to lose its drivers. And so they're saying, hey, don't want this driverless truck stuff on because it's anti-driver, when in fact, it's probably more anti-union, and it would be better for the overall industry. So we're kind of in a mess right now of different groups and liability and other things preventing us from implementing technologies that would save lives and make jobs like driving trucks far more interesting. It's the mess we live in.
Well, I just want to, since we're sort of having a conversation about this topic, I just want to ask again, what about a country like, say, Singapore or China or any country that just says car companies don't have liability in that case?
They could. I mean, you could have a law. I mean, we do have laws that limit liability for medical malpractice. Some folks would like to have it even more limited because it's a lot of what goes to our costs in terms of medicines. You could certainly have a law that did that. The question is could you get it passed? And in the United States, that means you've got to get over the unions. You've got to get over the other well-funded lobbying groups that are going to fight like hell to keep you from passing the law.
I think that what we're talking to is an audience in Southeast Asia or South Asia, and I think the question in front of us is how to create sustainable cities and create sustainable cities in other places besides the United States. So what you're talking about is, I agree completely, is a problem in the United States. But I think you're supporting my argument that the United States is going to be far behind in having smart, sustainable cities because of the structure of our beliefs and our laws. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. It's actually a nice discussion, and I'm sure that my friend, Mr. Alex, he has different kind of data and information he want to share with our audience. But I directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today, and thank you, just all of our audience as well as speaker, those who come up with a very good idea and different kind of technological insight of the smart city. And my last questions, that how we can develop better ecosystem. I want to start with Mr. Alex, then Dr. William, then Professor Donalds, and finally the concluding remarks from Mr. Rob. Mr. Alex.
You're muted. Alex, you're muted.
Thank you, Rob. How we can develop better ecosystems, again, comes down to education, just learning everything that we can about all of these subjects, having a good education system in place, and then implementing as much of this as possible. Some of the things that we didn't touch upon regarding sustainable cities is it does seem like there's going to be some sort of sand shortage or concrete shortage. So that is going to be a concern in the future. We didn't talk about motion detection lights, which I think they should incorporate more in smart cities because of light pollution and the harmful effects that it has on the environment. Kurt Lauder is working on a micro tiny home or a tiny home apartment concept. And if there was more tiny home apartment concepts or construction projects around the world, it would help close the gap between the rich and the poor, be for affordable income, or if you liked going outdoors more often. And right now we're seeing so many homeless people living on the streets. We're seeing shacks and shanties. So having some sort of tiny home apartment complex in smart cities would help solve a lot of stuff. There's cities building subways in flood zones in like New York, and that's just bad planning. So I think that we need more planning around those issues. I think we need to incorporate more trees in any sustainable project, any future city, more nature, and just somehow incorporating more plants, because that's helping sequester the carbon that the city's emitting. We didn't talk about recycling and how effective recycling could be. I'm not just talking about like cans and bottles, but also like the cardboard, the e-waste, the batteries, and that would help solve the pollution of that area. Also, rainwater catchment in a city with all the cars driving and all the pollution that it causes is it'd be nice if we caught all of the water that's run through that city before it goes back out into the natural environment. I wanted to mention sometimes airports are located really close to a city or in a city. It causes noise pollution, visual pollution, air pollution, and it also limits us from having drones in the future running our smart cities, or flying cars and all of that. So if we're building a new smart city, having the airport 2 miles, 5 miles in the distance would be important. And then having regulations on advertisement, I think, is an important thing for future cities. Instead of going to cities where you just see billboards and advertisement and flyers and everything everywhere, I think a smart city would also be visually appealing, and you wouldn't see advertisements. And sadly, that's one of the reasons why all these companies and corporations want to collect our data, is so we buy the right thing. So there has to be a balance. And I mentioned water. Oh, and then the last thing is just carless roads. Like Donald was saying, we don't need roads, cars on every road. They're duplicating this in a lot of European countries. They just blocked the downtown Santa Cruz road here. So I think we should have more walkways and pedestrian accessible areas.
Thank you, Dr. William.
Concluding mark. Thank you.
You're muted.
You're muted now.
Sorry, I began. This is a bit of a first for me, and I'm actually pleased to begin this way. I don't know that I necessarily have a conclusion, except I want to begin it this way. I want to begin with what I've learned today. Mm-hmm. And what I've learned from this discussion, and the key points that I would like to highlight for our audience as they roll through and have their own discussion, are the following: that the benefits of the integration of, at least at the base level, of data collection, later to be supplanted by artificial intelligence, at least to augment and supplement human activity. The benefits are immense and immeasurable, and quite frankly, the internet. We don't know where it's going to go until we start doing it, and other people come along and utilize the information and the concept in ways that we couldn't have imagined today. So there is no doubt in my mind that what I've learned today is that the future is incredible and it's possible. And I want to essentially rip off a comment from a speaker the other day, although I am giving her full credit, and that was from Gail. I believe she was on our program yesterday, and that is that the future doesn't have to be an austere future. It doesn't have to be one fraught with danger and post-apocalyptic and or any of that implies. However, what I learned today fundamentally is that begins with what framework we provide when we approach the issue and the challenges. And those questions are very serious. They are the ones of privacy, security, and freedom of choice. Now, in many respects, when Rob makes this point, that it fundamentally comes down to transparency, I absolutely cannot, I cannot agree more. Because any objection that I might have about what, for example, when I say I'm still going to drive my car, well, when Rob points out, well, then there's going to be an economic cost to that. Well, fine, I get that. Now I can make a choice. That makes it fundamentally clear that as long as we're transparent, and that is clear with every other systematic kind of decision that we would have to make when we transfer our data, which is fundamental and a building block to the creation of smart cities. But that is a bargain that I think that everybody would want to engage in, at least have those options, and be able to make those choices rather than have those choices foisted upon them without any discussion or any debate. And it seems to me that from this discussion, what I've learned is that if we do it right from the beginning, by analyzing and discussing and raising the more intractable questions, privacy, security, what are the implications long term? What does it mean ethically if we go down this path versus another path? That, I believe, makes for a more robust and more optimistic future. So what I've learned today is that the future is bright. what I've learned today is that the way we create that future is by asking the tough questions now. We don't shy away from it, and that we don't necessarily resort to just platitudes and assumptions about the future, rather than asking the tough questions now so that we can resolve them and at least create a track record so that other people can make their own decisions. But once again, I'm just having a great time. And happy holidays, Merry Christmas. And I happily hand the floor over. Back to
Thank you.
Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Donald.
Well, as I said, the technology that we're using to do these things was unanticipated. No one really even saw it in their vision of the future. When the internet came along, I was involved in it from the beginning, basically. I got my email domain in 1992, but I'd been using the internet for years by then, since 1978, actually. And before it was even the internet, it was ARPANET and UUCP network. But so my point is that I think for the audience, what's most interesting is the idea that all of the problems that we talked about today, again, are opportunities. And I think that the problems are going to be solved by entrepreneurs. And I think there was a mistaken understanding with Gail the other day, because Gail is extremely against corporations and businesses, very common in Santa Cruz. But entrepreneurs can be social entrepreneurs. Right now, Sharif is being an entrepreneur. He's not getting paid for this. It's a social. Entrepreneurs are people who use the resources to solve problems and create some sort of an institution that can continue to solve those problems. And so everything that we talked about today, privacy, and especially IoT. IoT has been one of the biggest, Internet of Things has been one of the biggest hot things in Silicon Valley for a while. And then, of course, the different kinds of ways of analyzing that data, which is big data. There's the technological issues of what do you do? If you have trillions of data points, what are you going to do? How are you going to look in that data and make any sense of it? And that's something we're just working on and learning. All of the restrictions and safety precautions that the other guests have been talking about seem valuable and important, but from another perspective, privacy privacy isn't a thing. Privacy isn't like, I was in Finland and one of my students was he was a Finn, but I was doing peer review for a conference, and he was talking about engineering privacy. Well, in some places, they've never really had privacy. I mean, you go to the kind of things that we think of as privacy, just were never there. So you can't, the view of privacy that Dr. William has could be very different than the view of privacy that Dr. Sharif has. They're not, it's not a concrete thing. And so I go back to what I say, that in places where there's more control, in a way, to make a smart city, there's actually more opportunity, or there's a lot of opportunity. And I do believe that smart cities, I mean, I don't just believe it, I know that, you know, Singapore is getting a smart city. Singapore will probably have autonomous vehicles long before we will. They'll have, and so will China and many of the countries in the world. So there's obvious benefits to that. And as you say, it's up to an individual person to decide. The United States isn't going to see that anytime soon, because the idea of privacy is of value. I mean, if you decide to opt out with your car and everybody else is opted in, how could that work? It can't. The only way it could work is if it's every single solitary car knows where every other single car is, and and that's the trade-off. I don't see that happening anytime soon in the United States because of the kind of attitudes that we have, which is not bad. I mean, I don't criticize those attitudes. It's our culture. And so, again, what I'm saying is to everyone listening is every one of these problems that we discussed is an opportunity for a new solution for entrepreneurs to be able to create a business and thrive.
Okay, looks like I'm up. So in terms of smart cities in the U.S., if you want to see just how far we can go here, keep an eye on Belmont in Arizona. We don't know if that's going to be the final name or not, but that's the proposed name for the city that Bill Gates is building in Arizona, and it's going to be designed from the ground up to be a smart city and to implement many of the things the Gates Foundation has been working on. And become a global showcase for how to build cities in the future. So, and because it is driven and funded by Bill, there's a pretty good chance that it will be cutting edge and it will reflect Bill's views in terms of how data is collected and how it is applied to make the city efficient, survivable, and most importantly, safe. He's got a real bee in his bonnet, and I agree with him that probably safety should be a preeminent factor in terms of how cities are built. And the nice thing is that we're learning during this pandemic is that people can pretty much live any place. You don't need to live in a city anymore, at least if you're doing many of the emerging jobs and certainly a lot of the technology jobs that exist on the market. You can live any place you want. And universities are suddenly discovering that being locked out is not reducing their ability to attract students. It's actually increasing their ability to attract students because now they can pull students from overseas that don't have to get through the immigration issues we've got in the United States or incur the costs of relocation. So the world is changing. So I disagree with Don in terms of the fact that at least we're going to have one city here that'll be a showcase. I generally do agree with him, though, in terms of getting this stuff through our existing regulatory structure is a lot harder than it would be in another country where you've got a more autocratic government and that government can move by fiat. Singapore in particular is an example of that. And it's a relatively benign government as well. The concern always is, though, when you've got a government moving on fiat and they're the ones that control the information, is what will they do with that information to further their agenda? And if they hold the information and you don't have access to it, they could certainly fabricate stuff and put you into prison if you're a dissenting vote to whatever it is they want to do very easily because you have no defense. They have your defense and they've gotten rid of it. So there are those concerns as well. And it's really creating the balance between the world of the future you want to live in and the world of the future that will undoubtedly be. And we've had an ongoing argument between the folks that believed in the Huxley's Brave New World stuff and Orwell's Big Brother going back forever. Which world will we end up with? Which extreme? And the fact of the matter is we're going to be in the middle someplace. But if you want to protect yourselves and really think about the future, watch these emerging developments in terms of smart cities and think about where it is you'd want to live and where you want to make a difference. As you're growing, and I know a lot of you folks are students and advancing, there are huge shortages in certain skill sets that are required for smart cities, AI, data scientists, and those folks that can bridge engineering and data are incredibly short supply right now and pretty much can name their own salaries. More important, the work is incredibly interesting and you're making the world a better place so it can be incredibly rewarding. So look out over the horizon, discover the things that you like doing, that you enjoy doing, and consider the jobs that are emerging that will really make a difference in how the world will be, and then factor your education into that. I'm not suggesting you do things that you don't enjoy doing to make a difference because you won't be successful, but find what you enjoy, tie it into where you believe the future will be, and think about where it is you want to live and what it is you want to do and build your future around those ideals. You'll have a much happier life, and at the end, it'll also be much more interesting. And one final thing, the world's future is in flux, and I at this phase in your education, I would argue against heavy specialization, because things can turn on a dime. I've been very successful being a generalist. I think it's a great path to be on. Learn as much as you can about as much diverse things as you possibly can, and that makes it easier for you to pivot if the market and technology pivots, and you don't find yourself off in a cul-de-sac someplace with no one around you, with a lot of people also looking for jobs. Be a bit flexible in your future, and best of luck. And I want to wish everybody, including the panelists, a very Merry Christmas. And if I don't talk to you guys before, a Happy New Year.
Thank you. Merry Christmas. And I want to give special thanks to those who joined today. Next week, we have a lot of excitement and a lot of different things. We do focus on industry revolutions, as well as cyber securities, healthcare systems. We are trying to create a very good awareness. I'm sure there are many youth community, those who engage with us, even after the session when we share. We have very strong group where mayors, like governments, universities, a lot of universities actually collaborating with us every day, at least 10 different universities from Asia Pacific, at least. So soon, I think we 100 of universities collaborations, and I'm sure your contributions will be very effective. And I'm sure many governments, policymakers, different business organizations, corporations, universities, they are engaged with World Talent Economy Forum. So how actually the speakers contributing for us, this is available for us. And specifically, I request the audience. I know that many audience sharing our contents, and that distributing our contents. Even I get a call from the different city mayors. They want to learn more about city concept. I'm sure from today's session they will understand how smart city concept moving around, and how we can develop more smart city in Asia Pacific. So thank you for today's sessions. Merry Christmas for everyone, and definitely with the collaboration of all of the intellectual communities, those who already joining with World Talent Economy Forums, we will solve many problems. This is our commitment. We not only do the policy level discussion, we take a lot of initiative. So like smart city projects, we have practically smart city project in hands. So any good idea, your technology, your collaboration, partnerships, anything, we are open. I'm sure the students, those who are joining, they are the great mentors around the world. In their field, they are the best. So if you have any questions, anything, you can communicate with us. Even we can arrange special sessions. Even next year, we will arrange summit and academy. By this way, you can reach this kind of resources, and you can learn many more. This is our objective. We want to change millions of people's life. I always believe that I'm not for a millionaires, I'm for millions. So World Talent Economy Forum will be for the millions of people. That is our commitment. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining today's sessions. Thank you. And Merry Christmas.
Yay.